Hey there, good evening. Welcome to the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to reporters, writers, editors. And then in our second segment, we do filmmakers and photographers and videographers and artists. And in our second segment today, we've got a wonderful Bronx photographer who interprets the way he sees the world in the borough of the Bronx. So we'll do that in our second segment. But in our first segment, our longtime friend, David Cruz, many people know him. He was the editor of the Norwood News. Now he is the acting editor for the People and Power Desk at Gothamist WNYC. So good evening. Nice to see you, David Cruz.
Hi, Gary. Thanks for having me.
First of all, just out of curiosity, because it is in your title, what is the People and Power Desk at Gothamist WNYC?
Thanks. So yeah, the People in Power Desk is a desk, one of several desks at Gothamist and WNYC that's comprised of both of multi-platform reporters. We do both radio and web for the content that we produce. And specifically, the People in Power Desk translates to essentially the politics desk. But we examine sort of policies that have a direct impact on New Yorkers. They're the players, institutions that are charged with carrying out the function of democracy and how political power influences New Yorkers' lives. And so we try to do that through, explainers, through the stories that are happening in the day, and then of course enterprise pieces that help kind of crystallize how exactly power is being used across New York City and in New York State as well. The desk formed about maybe a couple months ago. I would say back in July, and we've been really hitting the ground running, covering the Eric Adams administration, the Hochul administration, and all the sort of like the twists and turns in between. So it's definitely kept me busy.
It kept you busy, and I think people will respond to the notion of people and power. I mean, conceptually, it's a nice view of a way of looking at the news world, so to speak. All right, so let's get right to it. I thought it was your article was the first one I had seen about this, and that is the idea of metal detectors on subways. And of course, people will say, "Well, wait a minute. I'm running to work. I'm not taking everything out of my pocket and then go through, put in a little container, and then go through. There's no way you can manage that with the volume of people. But there is apparently new technology out there. So this is something that the mayor is talking about actually doing in our subway system to obviously prevent guns, knives, maybe. Where are we at? What is it?
Right. So the plan is, as far as like Mayor Adams is concerned, he had told several news outlets, including WNYC and Gothamist, that he was floating the idea of moving ahead on basically installing metal detectors or a detection system within the subway system. The problem is that he was very vague in terms of like what exactly that will look like. Although we do know that based on prior reporting we had done, that the mayor is looking at one company called Evolve Technology, and that company has actually installed detectors in other parts of the United States. And so in a news conference last week, he said that three companies are being looked at for detectors, but he sort of left it vague in terms of one, how much it will cost, where in the system they will be put in place. But his overarching approach is that he wants safety within the subway system, and so he kind of in the beginning it seemed like it was a very off the cuff remark, but as our headline indicates, like he's moving ahead with that idea. He's tasked his deputy mayor for public safety, Philip Banks, to begin just looking at which companies, which manufacturers will actually be viable to actually install such a tool within
Uh,
within the system.
Listen, you got subway stations and you got three or four turnstiles at a station. I mean, that is a big commitment. What I'm really interested in is the technology that allows you to do that. And I'm going to give you this. I happen to have occasion to have to go to the emergency room at one of the a relative was in the emergency room at one of the local hospitals. As you walked in, they said, "Please walk through this." And they didn't ask me to take anything out of my pockets or anything else. I'm assuming the technology is smart enough so that it will detect either a lot of metal that would be in a gun or maybe even a knife. I mean, I don't quite understand that. It's incredibly sophisticated. Um,
Right. And that is sort of like been the big question that has been left unanswered. It's just whether or not these are like true metal detectors, or if they are sort of like akin to what you see at an airport, in that people can go into a system, there's a screen that pops up, and the software sort of takes the shape, or scans for shapes that appear to look like a firearm, for instance. Really, it's kind of left unclear as to what
I'm
exactly that will look like. And I will say that Mayor Adams has said that he is going to be sort of like assessing it right now. So assessing could take, I don't know, take
Who knows how
a week,
long?
take a couple
But
months, right?
he's under a ton of pressure, obviously, to improve
Absolutely.
crime numbers on the subway and everywhere. And this would be quite an interesting way of doing it. It just, the technology strikes me. And if you say that it appears on a screen, that would suggest that you're going to need personnel. And if you need personnel, boy, you need money. And of course, if you're talking about city money or state money through the MTA, where does that money come from? Where is the personnel? I mean, there are a lot of questions. Having said
Well,
all that, it's kind of a cool innovation. And if you could actually put it in place, is it in operation in any other cities? Obviously, nothing as large as the New York MTA, but is it in operation elsewhere?
the short answer to that is we don't think so, though there have been pilot programs that have been launched before
Uh,
in Los Angeles and in Washington, D.C., from the same company I had mentioned before, Evolve Technology, or at least the one in just Los Angeles only. I have to double check on Washington. But essentially, a program has been launched in those two metro areas in the past. And I should point out that New York City also had a pilot program back in 2018 for
oh,
metal detectors within the Port Authority. And of course, it didn't really produce a whole lot, because that pilot program essentially just fizzled. Nothing
so
ever
in the
came
Port Authority before you, like on 42nd Street, before you got on a bus.
before you got to the subway portion of the Port
Or the
Authority.
subway portion. I see when
Right.
you go through that long tunnel that leads to
Right.
the 8th
Oh,
Avenue side.
well, actually, yeah, it's within the side of like where the Port Authority is, and where
Right.
where you have to like swipe your card to get into the system. I think there was a metal detector which you would have to go through, and then you would swipe. But
Well,
that
listen,
program didn't really last.
technologically, it's got to be incredibly sophisticated given the
Right,
numbers of people. People go streaming through those things, and we all know that. Uh,
right.
and 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 then, of course, if you do need operators on hand, boy, that's a lot of operators. I mean, count how many turnstiles there are in the city of New York. But you never know. Maybe if listen, I'm all for anything that can work. Is there a price tag on this?
That's the whole issue with
Uh,
with the Adams administration. It's a lot of announcements, not enough detail, and
uh,
so we're kind of left at the mercy of what the Adams administration puts out initially. But that shouldn't stop us from begin to start digging even further. I will say that I think notwithstanding the lack of details, this sort of just points to the larger issue that Adams is facing right now, and that he wants to really be the mayor who is responsible for lowering crime. And at the moment, he doesn't seem to really have a good grasp on it. Right
right.
now, crime is still up. It's up 42%. And within the subway system itself, it's skyrocketing. Now, one
His,
can make the
his
argument that,
efforts talking about more police on the subways, those haven't really worked.
right,
Moving the homeless people out of the subways, that hasn't worked on its own level, but also for lowering crime. So, as I said, he's under a lot of pressure to deal with it.
right,
I want to ask you another thing, since you do cover the mayor, and another story you wrote was the idea of the mayor releasing his tax information when he originally said no on tax returns. I got to tell you, I can't imagine in this day and age, especially after the Trump administration, any elected official saying I'm not releasing tax returns. Um, but apparently now he's waffling. Where are we at in the Mayor Adams and his tax returns?
right. So the mayor initially was asked, I guess, ahead of tax day, which was April 18th, whether or not he would commit to releasing his tax returns, and he said no. And so, of course, that led to a major backlash from good government groups, essentially saying that Adams should be sort of adhering to this tradition that goes back decades, where mayors had released a version of their tax returns one way or the other. And so this past week, he was asked again, and he did sort of like kind of strike this balance between no and saying yes, and that he said he was going to release tax information. And of course, he was using language that was very, very,
Yeah,
very
that's not.
tricky.
There's a difference between tax information and tax returns.
Right,
But,
exactly.
I don't know. I don't really have hard information on this, but don't we have regulations or requirements? Shouldn't there? I mean, certainly a mayor.
Well, New York City does have some kind of a. They do have some kind of policy in place from the Conflicts of Interest
Well,
Board.
policy might not be the same. Oh, through the conflict of interest board.
Correct. Yeah.
I see.
Every year, every elected official, from the borough president to a council member to the district attorney, has to release what's called an annual disclosure form,
That's right.
listing all of their, I guess, financial dealings, anything if they're taking out stocks, if they own property, if they owe debt. And so that will sort of give us a little bit of some kind of a line of sight in terms of like what it is that Mayor Adams has been
Right.
investing his money on and where exactly he's been putting his money towards.
A living and breathing example would be the former lieutenant governor of the state of New York, Brian
Right.
Benjamin. So yeah, it's just very interesting to me. And Mayor Adams, who wants to be the law and order guy, and wants to clear up things from the past, and yet a lot of the people that he's hired have had conflicts that have had to be reviewed very carefully. People who he's put in the head of agencies, some of whom are relatives. We're not quite where we want to be on all this, as far as I can tell. Anyway, Dave, so what are you working on next? Can you give us a clue?
Well, I know that we are expecting the executive budget to be released this
Uh-huh.
week. And we know that the mayor has sort of given a preview as to like what will be included in that executive budget. And that includes $171 million for safe haven beds and another $900 million for infrastructure across New York City spread out over 5 years. And so I think this is sort of like, an extension of an olive branch to the New York City Council, who thought he had presented a kind of austerity budget. So we're
Uh,
not for that.
David Cruz, this is why we have you, because you will be telling us all about it, get us the details, and then as time permits, we'll bring you back to the Bronx Buzz to review it, just like we did this evening. So, David Cruz, acting editor of the People and Power Desk at Gothamist WNYC. Thanks for your great work as always, and for your longtime friendship too.
Thanks, Gary. I appreciate it.
All right, we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to go to a Bronx photographer who has a very interesting point of view in a gallery coming up that showing that you'll be able to see as well.